specifically to enrollment. So that is not a change in the funding strategy, that is an enrollment change. The SED numbers, the number of SED students has been going down. As many of you will know, that has to do with the with moving away from the self-contained model where students are pulled out of the classroom and put into a small classroom, where schools are doing a better job of keeping special ed students in the classrooms where appropriate with support. You will see in line item 4, the governor is recommending the addition of 1 program manager for state-level support in the SED. And I would mention to you that that is something that we are very appreciative of. It's something we have been working with OPB on and members of the Appropriations Committees for Education. SED funding has been an area of review. The governor's office has been championing a review of how we can effectively serve these students given all that is occurring with changes in DJJ, et cetera. So one recommendation that stood out was that we should have at least 1 person at the Department of Education, State Department of Education, who could work with all of the SED centers on a statewide basis, and that's what the governor is recommending with number 4. I will also mention, it's in the bonding section, but I'll mention it here, it is bonds, but the governor is recommending $12 million in bonds to assist the GNETS centers, and that would be with renovation, construction, improvement in the centers. So in addition to the $128,000 the governor is requesting as an additional statewide position, in the bonding section, you'll see the governor is asking to support the SED centers with $12 million of bond funding, and those funds would be requested on an as-needed basis, and the construction plans would be reviewed by the department, et cetera. If I may move to page 188, the Information Technology Services budget. First thing I will point out is you will note that there is not a continued redirect in the IT services budget. So that's a way of saying that when we work with OPB, any concern about the removal of funds in the 15 supplemental budget, that was specific to amounts of money that we actually had in a PO. That was not intended to be a full-time change. So the redistribution that affects this program in the 15 supplemental budget of $750,000 will not be repeated in the 16 budget. So that was a temporary adjustment. In addition to the administrative changes, item number 6, increased funds for the E-rate program, is incredibly important. This $1.6 million is the operating funding increase that is necessary for us to purchase the additional bandwidth. And you may recall Superintendent Woods mentioned we're going to be moving from 3 meg per school to 100 meg per school. And that project has been ongoing, and many of you will remember bonds that were put in so that regions could build out the PeachNet network. This $1.6 million increase is a reflection of the additional cost that we will be paying regions per memorandum of understanding for the increased bandwidth. I will also mention that this reflects about 1/4 of the total cost because the federal funding through E-rate pays for about 75% of it. So it's $1.6 million. Currently we have a $3.4 million base. So it's a $1.6 million increase on a $3.4 million base, and it will dramatically increase bandwidth speeds from 3 meg up to 100 meg. So this is the continuing operating need, if you will, on top of the bonding that was necessary in the past year, and I appreciate that, what the state has done to allow regions to set up the PeachNet network. And as Superintendent Woods mentioned, it's our understanding that that is on track, and we will be ready to switch over to 100 meg starting July 1st or the next fiscal year, 16. The non-QBE program, Education Formula Program, includes a subprogram Sparsity. You'll see a $635,000 reduction. That is line 4 of the non-quality basic education formula grant. That $635,000 reduction relates to an elimination of hold harmless that the state put in place for fiscal year 15. Many of you may remember we didn't have sparsity, and therefore what we did was we changed the model. We brought in new systems and we changed the calculation. There were systems that had been grandfathered in that earned additional funds in the old way of calculating. So for this year, they were held harmless. Starting in fiscal year 16, those districts will not be held harmless vis-a-vis what they used to earn. They will earn the same amount as everybody else utilizing the same formula. And that was understood and has been communicated in terms of the sparsity. Really would like to move to QBE because that I think is the most important of all of the ads here. Again, Superintendent Woods mentioned to you there was a dramatic increase of $280 million of new QBE funds that will restore austerity. That will bring the state from its current 9.7% austerity amount down to about 5.8%. And you may remember 2 years ago it was up at 14%. So we have made a significant reduction in QBE, and this restoration is something the school systems will greatly appreciate. And that, of course, is on top of the $152 million that is full funding for the QBE growth, and the $75 million, which is necessary. Now, this is one of those administrative adjustments that I will mention here. There's $75 million of increased cost related to the teacher retirement that is embedded in what we pay out for QBE. So that TRS change is $75 million. The growth funding for QBE is $152 million. And in addition to that, and that would be what we would call QBE growth. In addition to that, there's $280 million of new money for QBE restoration. I would mention in school improvement, which is page 190, line item 6, there's a $2.4 million enhancement that is part of the State Board of Education's request. This is part of the strategic planning process that we put in place, and I appreciate many members of the General Assembly Education committees attended our working session where we discussed the number of staff and exactly what they would be doing in order to support the teacher keys and leader keys rollout. And so this number is reflective of what was requested by the State Board of Education. Line item number 7 is an increase of $350,000 for Teach for America, which would be something we have done in past years through the School Improvement Grant Line in order to get, as many of you know, students from Harvard, Yale, and other great schools who might not normally participate in education, but we'd like them to come in and give it a try for 3 to 5 years, and maybe they'll stay. So that's part of teacher improvement. Again, on page 191, Technology Career Ed, CTAE, you see the $752,000 ad, and that is line 6. This is actually state funding that is not the result of a redirect, but I would please like to point out that that is incredibly important. That $752,000 is specific to certification that we are doing in technology, and so this is part of that Certiport technology that needs to be accomplished. And Superintendent Woods mentioned to you in testing, you'll see that there is an enhancement in the testing budget, number 6 for Georgia Milestones of $1 million. We'll point out that is less than the enhancement for 15 supplemental, and that is because the cost in fiscal year 16 will be less than the cost in 15 amended. That was part of the contract. As you can imagine, the first year of implementation of any test involves development costs where they're writing questions, et cetera. So that cost has gone down. That amount will also allow us to offer 2 courses, as Superintendent Woods mentioned, both discrete and integrated, and that is something that the General Assembly members, the public, and the State Board have been asking for, so I think that's a really good ad, and of course the Governor supports that. Line item number 8, under testing, is an increase, and the intent of this increase is for the department to enter into a contract with a third party who would be a statistical expert. The point here is that we're talking about the student growth model, which is highly complicated. It's based very much on statistics. It is, as many of you have heard, incredibly important for teacher evaluations. And so the intent of the Governor is to make sure that while we do have a growth model currently and we are using it, we want to make absolutely certain that the growth models that we're using have been validated, and that the teachers and also the administrators who would be evaluated under the leader evaluation model can know that this is a highly respected statistical number. And of course, as many of you can imagine, the Department of Education also requested this funding because in the future, we don't have the race to the top funds. If teachers, or if there's ever any kind of a complaint, or somebody wants to know more information about how this very scholastic, if you will, or esoteric model is working, the governor's office wants to make sure we have experts, statistician experts that we can call on, and it won't just be the Department of Education involved in an administrative action. And subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman, that would be
one question. Representative Coomer, you have a question? No. Okay. Representative Hughley, you have a question?
Well, I think one of the things you're looking at, the milestones, what has been added to this will be a written response section. If for those of you familiar with the old testing, the CRCT, it was basically just a multiple choice type setting. And so this is something new. Again, one of the things we're looking at is trying to find out what information, of course, we anticipate, a thorough review of what we will see to say what, we hope that with the response itself, it will be something that we can, definitely aid our teachers in having a deeper understanding of what our students know, what they have acquired during the course of the year. One of the things I've expressed a desire to do is look, really more towards a diagnostic type, testing approach as well. So that this could give our teachers the ability to really personalize the education needs of our students. With this is, definitely something we have to look at. And looking in conjunction not only with testing, of course this goes with teacher accountability, we have to take that in conjunction, but also looking at the standards themselves. I think when we give the test, there are a lot of factors that go in that, but we do have, at least we'll have a deeper understanding of, with this added response, to perhaps gain a deeper understanding of what our students have learned, and again their ability to express and hopefully to address critical learning issues and needs that they will have during the course of the year. But to give you a point blank, because it is new, I think we're just going to have to kind of wait and see and make that. But once we do get this data in, I'll be glad to make sure that you have the information, that as we all have information across the state of what we're gathering from this and how we can best use this to improve student learning across the state.
Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions, I think. One is, I know you talked about the percentage of remaining austerity reduction. What's the dollar amount that's now left as austerity reduction? Is it like $500 million, roughly?
It would be roughly 500. It's 747 now minus 280. Sorry.
747?
Yep.
So roughly 500.
Yes.
Second question, I saw with the QBE section for fiscal year 16, a reduction of $1 million for the special needs scholarship. Is that enrollment-based, or is that a priority change? So.
That is based purely on enrollment. It is the number of students. And recall that in Senate Bill 10, there are 4 opportunities to enroll and withdraw. And I would say that it's really right now reflective of withdrawals that are coming in halfway through the year. So, of course, when we set the budget, it's based on the first year. We tend to have, through the course of the year, we tend to have more people dropping out than coming in. At least that's in this year. I'm not sure what the future trend will be.
Thank you.
Senator Burke, this is your first initial question, so we usually administer a few licks or something when you ask your first question, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding from our superintendents is they're concerned about the choice they're going to have to make with the...
He's on. It should come right on.
Is that better?
He's on. Grab the other, Senator Jackson's mic. Maybe your mic's not working good. Just a second.
Testing?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Thank you. My superintendents are concerned about the choice they're having to make about the status quo in June within the task force coming up with QBE formula changes, and that the rules are going to change shortly after they make that choice. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I'm sorry. We thought we were going to be asking about the IE squared system charter. Yes, the governor has announced that he will be looking at, I know members of the General Assembly as well will be looking at a task force for making changes to QBE. There have been a number of reviews, including that from the task force last year. We actually incorporated some changes into the QBE law. We'll be talking to the superintendents, but right now what we're saying is that the governor is clear that there's nothing in this budget, either the 15 amended or 16, that would be reflective of any changes that might come as a result of the task force. It's my guess that any changes that would, if they're fundamental in nature, would probably take place in the fiscal year 17 budget and perhaps the 16 amended. But that would probably only be for the changes that are less dramatic. So there is nothing in this budget reflective of the task force that the governor has been talking about, which is to review QBE. We do understand that the governor and others are very interested in fundamentally reviewing QBE to bring it up to standard with current funding, to look at things like student-based appropriation, et cetera. But that right now is all discussion. There's nothing in this budget reflective of the potential changes.
Senator Stone.
Yes, if I may. The question then is, what is the cost potentially to the state of IE squared or charter system or status quo? Firstly, to the state, the additional cost potentially would be with the funding for the system charter grants. Currently, that's just under $100. That's one of the line items. That's one of the enhancement amounts that the governor has put in for both the 15 amended and 16 budgets. That's the only cost I can imagine that I can think of that actually would come for the state in terms of additional funding. Of course, I should mention, for school districts, it is incredibly important, because while the amount of money that we will be sending out to districts will not change except for the system charter grant, what the school systems are going to be able to do with those funds, vis-a-vis class size and teacher salaries, is incredibly dependent on the decisions that they make. A status quo district, as the current law is written, would not be able to have the larger class sizes and have the furlough days or whatever other accommodations need to be made to the salary schedule starting next year. And that could be very problematic for districts that still, despite the restoration of QBE funds, still might have some difficulty. But of course, the import and hope of the districts, and what we're helping the districts to do, is make strategic decisions, not just based on funding, but look at corporate governance. What's the best model to allow parental involvement, to allow the right principals to be empowered, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question I need to ask, how many students do we have FTE count in the state of Georgia now?
We have approximately 1.7 million, but of course, what I didn't mention to you was that we had the QBE growth that I mentioned to you is reflective of a 22,904 FTE growth.
So additional 22,904 additional students?
Yes, FTEs is basically a student.
How many teachers do we have now?
Last I heard, it was about 98,000. That number changes. We have a CPI report that talks about certificated staff, which would mean teaching certificate, but some of the teachers are actually, some folks who are certificated are actually administrators. So we always have to come up with an estimate. But last I heard, it was somewhere around 100,000. Past years, we've had 120,000.
So you mentioned the teachers. That includes the principals as well?
Yes, sir. The CPI report, which is what we collect, which tells us the number of certificated staff, indicates that. In order for us to determine exactly how many of those certificated staff are working in the classrooms, we have to look at a different report, which comes in at the end of the year. The CPI report comes in October. The class information comes in at the end of the year. So what we can do is look at last year's report to determine what we now think is the number of teachers who are actually teaching as compared to the number of certificated staff.
One final question is, the money for the additional school counselors, is it generated by QBE for the rate change in the FY16?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. The money for the additional, what was
Counselors, school counselors?
School counselors are included in QBE. And if there are additional students, those students would generate the same amount of money for counselors that any of the other students would. Although, with full funding of QBE, what that really means is that these new students, these 22,000 new students, 23,000 really, will be funded without any austerity reduction. So there's a slight increase, if you will. But the amount of money for counselors is, in fact, yes, embedded in the FTE funding. And so the funding for counselors will be prorated and calculated and included in the growth number.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Orrock.
Mr. Chairman, appreciate the presentation. Could you share with us whatever the department statistics are on the number of school systems or percentage of school systems that still have teachers furloughed, and how you predict the enhanced funding being able to address or move us down on furloughed teachers?
Yes, if I may. We recall that the General Assembly and the governor instructed school districts to take the $314 million of additional funding from what was put into this year's budget and use it for furlough reduction and or teacher raises and or things that would assist teachers. And I appreciate the flexibility, and we do, that you provided to the school districts. We collected a report to answer that question. I can tell you that 94% of the districts have eliminated or significantly reduced furloughs. 5% of the districts actually, unfortunately, had an offset in equalization that was a negative that overwhelmed the amount of money that we were able to restore in QBE. So the point was 94% significantly reduced or eliminated completely their furlough days. Some of them did not because they frankly didn't end up with as much state money as they did in the prior year because of changes to equalization. We did share that report with the governor's office. I believe we provided it to the budget offices as well, but that was a very important report, and I appreciate that the school districts stepped up and provided that information to us because it was collected and sort of well outside of what we normally collect, and that was the specific intent, was to make sure that we could show what was done with the $314 million. We do know that so I can't answer your specific question today about can we eliminate all furlough days, and I believe that was your question, with the additional $280 million. I can tell you without a doubt, mathematically, there is more than enough to eliminate all furlough days. I think the intent is not just to eliminate furlough days, but also to provide raises. What I would like to be cautious about, though, is to look back at those other pieces of the state funding that might impact, for example, equalization, before I tell you that 100% will. I can tell you that there's enough money statewide to do that. I also believe that the districts that were not able to eliminate furloughs are on a plan to reduce it. And they took the $314 million very seriously. The $280 million, I can assure you, will be used significantly similarly, which is that they will eliminate furloughs, and they will also go to raises. We have more than 106 districts that have 0 furlough days. 106 districts with 0.
And of school systems, there was talk of some school systems in parts of the state being unable to run a full school week. 100, where are we on that statistic?
Yes, ma'am.
And have they gone back to 5 days?
Yes, ma'am. So really, when we say furloughs, we're talking about reducing either 10 of the professional days, or we're talking about reducing below the 180 instructional days. So in order for a school district to reduce a teacher's salary, they have to furlough them. So when we say furlough, we're talking about reducing salary. And when you hear the word furlough, it's usually a combination of a reduced number of professional development days, and in some cases, a reduced number of instructional days, which are supposed to be 180, subject to furloughs. So.
And are you able to give us a chart at some point on where we are with our school systems being able to run a full 180, where, you know, what that looks like, what the...
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Representative Roberts, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of a follow-up on that, just to make sure I understood you right. You said 94% eliminated or reduced furlough days, but then you come back, so we've got 106 systems that have 0 furlough days, correct?
That's
I'm trying
correct.
to
It's
get
probably
that
a little...
percentage as to what actually reduced to 0.
Yes, sir.
Because when
So,
you say reduced, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm kind of trying to figure out, okay, reduced, are we down to only 1 furlough day, 3 furlough days? But trying to get to that point, just a little bit of clarification.
and I can provide that clarification for you in a report. I will tell you, we looked at a lot of things in our report. We're looking at fund balances. We're looking at if they didn't completely eliminate them, why not? What happened to their fund balances? We had some districts, for example, that told us they avoided additional furlough days. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we looked at their fund balance for the prior 2 years, if they have an operating deficit, which is more than half of their current amount, it means that next amount of fund balance, it would suggest that next year they're going to have to introduce furlough days. What we were able to do was say, if we know you don't have the fund balance, you would have had furlough days. So by us restoring money in QBE, it allowed you to have enough money to take up whereas you used to be using fund balance to make up the difference. You don't have any fund balance anymore, and we look at that. Now we know we have put in state dollars so that you can avoid future furloughs. So we actually gave credit for that as well, and we have that in the report. We'll get that for you.
Great to get a copy of it.
Yes, sir.
Representative Pruitt, you have your light on?
Yes, can you hear me? Used to know how to operate it, but I had a year off.
Great. Try Senator Bethel's and see. It's all on.
All right, could you? Hello? Hello? All right. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I'll holler. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need a clarification. We're having a real issue retaining pre-K teachers. And they haven't had raises in quite some time. And so the school system where I'm particularly talking about is we don't have any furlough days. And thank you very much for the governor last year for providing the money and our school board making the right decisions. But still, pre-K teachers are leaving, going to other grades, and the pre-K teachers are very difficult to keep in place because they haven't had any raises. Are you telling me that the funding will be there like it has been in the past for the locals to decide how to use the money, and will it be able to be used for pre-K increase for their salaries also?
Well, sir, let me be clear. Pre-K funding is not in the K-12 budget. K is above pre-K. However, I do know from looking at the Department of Early Care and Learning's budget that the governor has put funds in. I don't feel good about addressing that. The governor has put funds into the Department of Early Care and Learning's budget, and I believe that was part of the reason, and I'll let them speak for it. I will just say for the K-12 budget, what it will allow us to do is there are school districts that allow pre-K programs in their building. It's in their best interest to have students be prepared for kindergarten when they come in.
I believe pre-K comes out of the HOPE money, and I apologize for that. I just wasn't thinking. Thank you.
Well, sir, it's also in a different budget. So whatever the funding source, we'd love to see it, but it's not ours, not K-12.
Senator Jackson.
Can you hear me?
For you two gentlemen, and I have the greatest respect for, be willing to stand here today and say this is a wonderful and beautiful budget for education in Georgia, largely at the dictates of our good government. Would you all be willing to say that we've passed the process
Well, I hope that I at least alluded to that in my opening remarks. I think, as far as the budget itself, I'm very appreciative of the governor's budget. It is a great budget. I think that one of the things that was kind of expressed to me that people concerned, they looked at last year and said, well, it was just a political move. Well, I think this secondary budget that has come, or sequential budget has come out, has showed that the commitment by the governor and the General Assembly is there. So I think on behalf of myself and all of Georgia education, we are deeply appreciative. We know that we are still, coming through a very tough economic, tailspin. And I think that, those things take time. And I think we understand that. But for the money that has been given, I can just say thank you. It's a great budget. We're looking forward to working together. And we're looking forward to doing the very best with our kids. So I think that, on behalf of even giving flexibility, I think as Mr. Austin said, reducing furlough days, and whether that means increasing our instructional days or, the professional learning days for our teachers, that is great. Because that means that we increase that, it helps them out, because it does help our teachers out with the pay, because they're getting what they're contracted to get. And so we thank you for that. It's a great budget, and we look forward to implementing it over the next year. Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent, looks like you've survived your first appearance before the Appropriations Committee. There are no other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And again, thank you. If we may be of service, please let us know. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for this morning. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.